Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. This time we're going to
Yeah.
be looking at
Sounds good.
the Book of Job,
Okay.
um, and specifically a speech by one of Job's friends,
Hmm.
Eliphaz. Now, for those of you who haven't read in a while,
Yeah.
or maybe haven't read at all, the basic setup here
Right.
is that Job is this guy
Yeah.
who has just had the worst series of tragedies you can
Hmm.
imagine. He loses everything, loses his family, loses his wealth, loses his health.
Oh, wow.
It's really rough. And so his friends come
Mm.
to try to comfort him.
Okay.
And Eliphaz is one of those friends. But what we're going to see in this speech is that Eliphaz's way of comforting Job is to try to explain his suffering. And it gives us this really interesting window into how people in ancient times
Yeah.
understood why bad things happen. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like a deep dive into their worldview.
Yeah, that's really fascinating.
Yeah.
And you know what strikes me about this is that even though it's an ancient text, the questions that Eliphaz raises are ones that we still wrestle with today, you know? Like, why do bad things happen to good people? Or, is suffering always a punishment for sin? Like, is there some kind of cosmic justice system at work?
Right. And are we, like you said, ever really good enough
Yeah.
in God's eyes?
Exactly.
Okay, so let's get into Eliphaz's speech right off the bat. I notice how he starts out, kind of subtly, positioning himself as this
Yeah.
wise advisor
Yeah.
who's almost like hesitant to speak.
It's really interesting how he does that, like in verses 2 through 6.
Yeah.
He uses this very clever rhetoric. He's trying to sound humble, but at the same time, he's establishing his authority. He's reminding Job of all the times in the past where Job was the one giving advice. And everyone was looking to Job for wisdom and strength. And you know what I find kind of ironic? Is that Eliphaz was actually silent. When Job was initially in all that pain.
Oh, that's right. It's like now that Job is kind of past the initial shock, then Eliphaz feels like he can step in with this wisdom.
Exactly. Like he's trying to make up for lost time.
Yeah. And the way he does it is by appealing
Mhm.
to Job's past piety. Like he's saying, look, you've always been so devout, so righteous. That should give you hope now.
Yeah.
And for our listeners who might not be super familiar with the term, piety basically means like
Yeah.
showing strong religious devotion.
Right, exactly. It's about outward signs of faith. And you know what this sets up is a really key theme in Eliphaz's speech.
I get about that.
The idea that outward righteousness
Mhm.
equals inward purity,
Mm.
which then equals God's blessing.
So basically, he's saying that if you look like you're good, then you must be good.
Yeah, and that God will reward you for it. And if you're suffering, then, well, maybe there's something not so pure going on inside.
Interesting. So then he just comes right out and says it. Only the wicked suffer. Bad deeds, bad consequences. Sounds kind of like what we
Yeah.
would call karma today, right?
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? It's like there's a very simple cause and effect. And, in a way it makes sense because we do see that in life sometimes. Like if you make bad choices, you often face negative consequences.
Yeah, definitely. But
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I completely buy it as like a universal rule.
Yeah. Because sometimes it feels like good people suffer and bad people get away with things.
Exactly.
Mm.
And what about things like just random accidents?
Yeah.
Or natural disasters?
Right. Like where's the bad deed in those situations you hit on? Some of the key problems. With this kind of worldview, it doesn't leave much room for nuance or the possibility of undeserved suffering. And, to really drive his point home, Eliphaz uses this really striking analogy in verses 10 and 11.
Oh, yeah. The lion analogy.
Right.
This one always kind of sends chills down my spine. It's
Mhm.
so vivid. He's basically saying that even the lion,
Yeah.
like the king of beasts, this
Yeah.
powerful creature, even he falls when he breaks the natural order, like when he goes against how things are supposed to be. And so Eliphaz is implying that Job must have done something to deserve this fate.
Mhm. Exactly. It's a powerful image, and it would have been very convincing to his audience.
Yeah, definitely.
Mhm.
But then things take this really interesting turn. In verses 12 to 21,
Mhm.
suddenly we're in this dreamlike, spooky setting.
It's like a whole different genre now.
I know, right? It goes from this
Uh-huh.
wise lecture to this, like chilling whispered message, a terrifying spirit. Why the sudden shift?
I think it's a brilliant rhetorical move because it elevates Eliphaz's authority even more. He's not just speculating anymore. He's claiming to have received a message directly from God.
Ooh. And in those days,
Mhm.
dreams were seen as like direct communication from the divine.
So this would have been incredibly powerful for his audience.
Okay, so let's paint the picture
Mhm.
for our listeners. It's the middle of the night. Eliphaz wakes up.
And he's
sees.
this shadowy figure, this spirit gliding past his face. And the hair on his body stands on end.
Oh, wow. You can't even make out what it is. But then he hears this chilling voice.
Right.
So what this mysterious voice tell him?
Well, the message boils down to this. Humans are inherently weak and flawed. We're made of dust compared to God. How can we possibly claim to be truly righteous?
And it even suggests that angels, those beings of pure light, can mess up.
Even they aren't perfect.
Wow. So does this dream change our understanding of Eliphaz's argument? Is he so sure anymore that Job must have sinned to deserve his suffering?
I think we see a crack in his certainty now. The dream reveals a fear that maybe things aren't so simple. Maybe suffering isn't always a direct consequence of wrongdoing.
So we've explored this ancient perspective on suffering, and it's given us a glimpse into how people grappled with these big questions of justice and God's will. And it's fascinating how some of these ideas still resonate today, even if we might not agree with all of them.
Absolutely. And, that dream with its suggestion that even angels can be fallible, it opens up even more questions.
Pointless.
Like, if suffering isn't always punishment for sin, then why does it happen? And what does that mean for how we understand our relationship with God? That's something I hope you'll all continue to ponder.
Yeah, that's a great point. And something we can all think about. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll see you next time.
See you later.